I'm just had my first LumaLearn class today. I'm just finishing putting the assignments up.
Oh, okay.
Well, and so I don't know if you can tell I'm not looking, but
All right, I think we're here now. I think we're live.
I have my coffee. I hope that's okay.
All right, there we are.
All right.
So it appears that we are live. Mm-hmm. Oh. All right. So let me mute that. And we're going to get everybody in here. I'm going to go ahead and send out a link for this.
Okay.
So that we can let everybody know we're up. And we'll invite some of our teachers in as well, and they can invite some of their students. So this is the first time that we're doing this live stream from LumaLearn, the world that is LumaLearn. And so the purpose of this live stream is just to provide resources and advice and some of the knowledge that we have acquired over the years in various settings. So let me just set this up here. Okay, so I think we're good there. So we should have some people come in here in just a second. We might just have a handful of us, and that's okay.
That's fine.
So, Margie, would you like to introduce yourself and tell those who are coming in and those who will be watching this in the future what is your experience with teaching and what do you do on LumaLearn, as well as kind of outside of LumaLearn? What have you done for teaching? What makes you qualified to answer the questions?
Okay, there you go. Well, I went to the University of Florida. I do not have a teaching degree. I have a BA in Spanish. I have graduate hours in testing and assessment. And I've been a homeschool mom. This, my biggest one accolade is the University of Homeschooling that I ran and learned in. So I have 6 children. I homeschooled them all from the beginning all the way through, and we survived.
Trial by fire. That's the way we do it, right?
That is. And during that time, because of the Spanish I had, and especially in the old days when I started, there were not many resources. And so a group of people with older homeschool kids asked me if I would teach their kids Spanish when my oldest was 5. And so I did in my home. And since that time, I have taught Spanish. I have studied 7 languages. So I also teach French and German some places, but here at LumaLearn, I teach Spanish. I teach some locally in person. And I've been teaching language to homeschoolers ever since then. So we're talking about 25 years now, which is hard to believe. All my kids have graduated. And during that time, from teaching in my home to moving to area tutorials where people pay a fee and the tutorials pay the teachers, to moving online, which I've been doing for 10 years now. So I still teach locally and I teach online. And locally I've taught from, preschool all the way through high school. And I've learned a lot, but I'm immersed in the homeschool community. And that is my experience. I understand homeschoolers. I understand the good and the bad of it and how to, I probably made every mistake in the world. And so I have experience with how to fix those mistakes or things. So I just have a lot of time and experience in the homeschool world and in teaching to homeschoolers. And I've been on the board of our homeschool group as well. So in leadership.
Okay.
And and I do speak at conventions on different topics. So in our state.
Okay, excellent. So you are definitely an expert in the field. I think that definitely qualifies you to be an expert in the field. So what have you noticed are some of the most important, impactful changes in homeschooling from when you started, or even 5-10 years ago until now? What are the, and of course keeping the kind of the coronavirus thing to the side, because that's of course its own area. But what are some of the
Right.
things that you find have been the biggest
There's
changes?
been a lot of changes. Homeschooling has become a much bigger umbrella than it was at first. And you realize I was homeschooling before the internet. So there's been huge changes. And part of that was when you wanted to know something, you had to research it. And you had to find those resources, either in person or go to a convention or buy a homeschool magazine and learn that way. So there was much more initiative. There was nobody to hand you the pack unless you found the homeschoolers and then in your area, and then you would get the information. So that information pathway is an enormous change. And one of the benefits of the way I had to do it was I really had to know what I wanted. I had to figure that out and seek it out. And there weren't like there are today. You post a question on Facebook and you have 50 different answers with 50 different philosophies and 50 different resources. And you don't know if those people, I mean, some people are saying, well, I'm going to try this. This sounds good, but they have no experience with it. You don't know if the person has any weight behind their opinion or not. And so you have a lot more information available. And one of the deficits, I think, is that now let's put Corona aside, okay, is that people tend to go to the internet for their answers and sometimes their community. And you lose so much when you aren't talking face to face with somebody, because you get much more information and communication in person than you do with a question online. So probably that information pathway led to many more differences, but I would say that's one of the biggest ones.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, my experience is a little bit different. So I was a homeschool kid, and I grew up initially up until the 5th grade. I was in private school, but my dad was the principal, so I basically was homeschooled because you didn't get away from it. It was kind of the same thing. And we had a set kind of established curriculum that we used there. And then when my parents decided to homeschool the younger 3 of us, my sister and my brother and I, that was when I was 10 years old. And so I went through the whole process of, being home. And I was a very social person, and we had the people saying, but how are they going their socialization and whatnot? But we managed. We were very involved with things like 4-H group, and my parents did a really good job of getting us out there. And so I think I had a very good experience with homeschooling, and I've always been a fan of it. So I've always been an advocate and encouraged people to look at it. I think that the options it gives and the freedom that it gives, and for somebody like myself who's a very experiential learner and a very analytical learner, those are not learning styles that are really addressed in public school or even in private schools very often. And I think they are more. I think people are becoming more aware of that. But my learning style was such that I would be afraid of kind of getting myself stuck into an too academic of a setting. So and then the last couple of years, my father was sick, and so I graduated from a very small private school. But again, it was very, very much. It was almost more like a co-op in that situation. But I finished my schoolwork early enough, and so this is where my teaching came in. I finished when I was 15 and a half, and so they needed a teacher, and they said, "Oh, Priscilla doesn't have anything else to do. Let's make her the kindergarten teacher and the choir director." So that was trial by fire. So I was like, Okay, I'll do it. Kind of like what we're doing here. And, you know, hey, Priscilla, let's do a live stream. Okay, fine, no problem. And I actually think that some people might be going into another live stream that I had set up initially, but I couldn't connect with this. So I'm going to take a peek real quick here
Okay.
because
Well, while you're looking, I will say that a big change, and your parents probably experienced this. In the old days when we said we were homeschooling, we got 2 questions. And the first one was, is that legal? Nobody asks that anymore. You know, people
right.
know too many. And the second they still ask is, what about socialization?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've heard that since, and I really had the same question until I experienced and thought about it. But nobody ever asks anymore, is that legal? That's a big change.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually going to send this link out in another spot here because I think, yeah, again, speaking of trial by fire, we're figuring out the ins and outs of setting this up. So, okay, it does show that we're live. Okay, good. But I think there was another one that maybe was coming up. So, I think we're okay. I think we'll get people in here. But again, even if we're recording this, I think this is still good information. So, all right, yeah, and you're absolutely right. The socialization. So how do we address that? Because this is, I mean, I'm seeing this now. This is not a question that's gone away. You said the first one, people are saying, is that legal? Now people know it's legal for the most part, although some people think it shouldn't be legal, which I think is a little ridiculous because parents have always been in charge of their kids' education.
Yes.
And only in the relatively recently have we decided that, hey, you know, the government needs to be at the head of that. Relatively recently in the scheme of things. But I think with the socialization, that's still something that comes up, and people say, you know, especially now. Okay, now we can talk about coronavirus.
Right.
Now, especially because homeschooling is one issue of socialization, and as you homeschool, you actually find, I think you find that if you do it right, your kids are being more socialized and more well-rounded because they're not just surrounded by their peers. They're surrounded by people of different ages and different backgrounds and different interests. And you know, when they're in a co-op, they don't just have, you know, 25 fifth graders that exclusively hang out with one or two adults. Instead, you've got the whole gamut. You've got everybody from pre-K all the way through high school, and then of course the teachers and parents and whatnot. And I think that actually gives advantage for homeschooling. But right now we've got the corona issue going on, and so now people coming into it, I'm afraid, are going to have this kind of this idea that homeschool kids are not socialized. This is going to be almost solidified in their minds because what they see is a very unsocial homeschooling, because in many cases they're not allowed to be social. So how do we deal with that? How would you deal with that? I mean, hypotheticals, right?
Well, yeah, it is hypotheticals. And of course, my kids are grown, so I'm not really experiencing that right now because, gosh, we car schooled rather than homeschooled. We were very involved in activities. But big picture, I would say 2 things about socialization. First, what do you mean by socialization? Do you mean, do they ever see any other people? Are they sheltered together? Are they, or do they get the chance to interact? Or what is socialization? And I think the word has different definitions. Second, I would say, outside of Corona, that homeschooling is advantageous to socialization for some of the reasons you just said. You are not restricted to only talking to your peers. Generally, you interact with everybody from little kids to the elderly, and you become more aware of the value of other people that aren't just your age. You're not any better than the ones 2 years behind you, and you're not any less than the ones 2 years ahead of you. And the 80-year-old people are of great value. I just saw a great suggestion today is somebody is having her son interview and learn from elderly or older people who have retired to understand their value and their knowledge and wisdom
Mm-hmm.
And plus helping, like you did, teach that to younger kids and getting involved in what's important to them. You can have missionaries, or if you're involved in a church, to dinner. You can interact, make it with people of different cultures and ethnicities. And homeschool, you are not hearing unless your culture demands it. Certainly, we never had any racial slurs in our home,
Mm-hmm.
or never said we believe that every person is of intrinsic value because they're made by God, and we are one race. We may have different skin colors, and that's how we brought up our kids. And they weren't, it was, my kids were old before they ever heard, and it was probably from it was from a public school kid at church, a racial slur, and they
Mm-hmm.
had no idea what that meant. So,
Yeah.
do we need to know what that means? Yes. Do we need to know that that is wrong? Yes. But you can sculpt that socialization for the benefit of your kids rather than just let me throw them in this box. And this is not an example I made up, but let's take 6-year-olds. How many people say, I want to put my 6-year-old at this table with all the other 6-year-olds because I really want them to learn good table manners? That's not happening. Or my kids, they never came home and said, Mom, Susie keeps her room so clean. I think I'm going to do that. They always, if somebody said something wrong or had a food fight, that's what my kids remembered from other people.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to drift to that negative. So I don't want to put them in a Lord of the Flies situation. I don't want to put them in a jungle. I want them to know how to act properly and have relationships and friends, and
Mm-hmm.
not have to be bullied or be a bully. So I really
Well, and
think that's a strength.
yeah, and I think that unfortunately I've seen, and not all public schools are made equal, and also you can put a lot of private schools in that same
Right,
category.
right,
There's
right,
some very good ones and some not so good ones. So
right.
you can't really make just a generalization about it. But
Exactly.
the Lord of the Flies analogy is very interesting because there's a lot of that's very real, and I encountered that because when I went my last couple of years in the private school, um, I had to take the bus, and that was my interaction with the public school kids, and it was crazy the things that these kids would try to get by with, and how they would bully, and how they would kind of attack each other, and it was just an eye-opening experience. And I thought, if that's socialization, I don't think I missed out on anything. I really don't. But there was something that came up today in one of the homeschool groups that I frequent, and I kind of check it out and see what people are talking about. And I like to stay in the loop. And one of the things that they were saying is, how do you do a segment or a section or a packet for Native American or for First Tribes cultures? And one of my thoughts was, this is a fantastic opportunity to call up some of the elders, to call up some of the people, find out who they are, and have your child interview them.
Right.
Because you can read a book and you can go on YouTube and you can do all of these things and get it that way, but you're not really understanding the people unless you get
Exactly.
into that culture. And we grew up right in the middle of all of these Native American reservations, and so this was kind of just a matter of fact in our culture. My mom really grew up in there, was doing all the dances and stuff like that with the local Native kids, and so that was just kind of part of her culture growing up. So we always admired and we always looked up to the people in this culture, even though it was somewhat removed from us, but it was always present, and we were never ashamed of asking questions and saying,
Right.
okay, so why is it that maybe you do this sort of tradition and we do this sort of tradition, and what's the difference? Why does that matter? And doesn't matter, is it just a matter of preferences? So I think that's a great idea. It's just talking to people. We still have telephones, and we have things like Zoom and Messenger and all of these other resources that we can use in order to connect with people. So I think that this is one of the things that we underutilize right now. And when you think about it, kids were not socialized before Corona. They were
Right.
always online. In the
Mhm.
last 5, 10 years, kids from 7 years old, 6, 7 years old are constantly online. Not all of them, but a lot of them are always connected, always on YouTube, always doing this and that. So they're not getting socialized anyhow. So I think that the fear of kids not being socialized is a little bit of smoke screen maybe, and it might just be people that don't really understand homeschooling might be saying, oh, they're not going to be socialized. Well, let's just face the facts. Kids are not being socialized, on an average. Some of them are, but they're not really being socialized on
Right.
an average. And
But there are
again,
some there are some concerns that I find, and I don't mean to insult, a little silly. I've been said, well, how will they ever learn to stand in line? Or
mhm,
they can't be a cheerleader. My mother-in-law was very concerned about that. Or
mhm,
something. How long does it take a kid to learn to stand in line? Like 5 minutes or less?
right,
No
right,
matter how old they are, they can learn that. And as the homeschool world has grown, we have football teams, swim teams, cheerleading competitions. In fact, the best, if you're aware of that, the best, even in public schools, go to the club teams or the travel teams. And sometimes they don't even play for teams, or they go to the cheerleading teams and competitions. So they're really, the homeschool group community in general has adopted and um, has an alternate way to do those things that were important to us.
mhm,
Like what I wanted for my kids, I loved Valentine's Day and getting Valentines. And I borrowed this suggestion. In every group pre-COVID, we had a Valentine's skating party, and everybody made a container, and you went, you signed up, and you brought Valentines and just put them in the baskets and skated together, you know. So the things that are important to us, there's a mom or dad who will invest the time and say, I want this for my kid, and provide that for the
mhm,
community. It's
right, right, right. Well, and that kind of reminds me of the area that I feel like I a little bit missed out on was, music. Music was always really important to me, and I would have loved to have had the opportunity to have been in a band, or, learn some of the brass, the wind instruments. That my parents didn't know how to play. They didn't play any instruments. And the only thing available was piano. My sister took piano, and she was a very competitive person. So my mom said, no, I'm not messing with it. You do the other stuff.
yeah,
She does
yeah.
piano. And so I had to
Uh-huh,
teach myself once I became an adult.
uh-huh.
But so, and you learn that. That's one of the skills you learn as a homeschooler, is how to teach yourself stuff, how to teach yourself
Exactly.
skills you don't need a class to learn. But um, yeah, definitely that I had those opportunities for music. But this is one of the advantages that we have now, because there's so much available on the internet,
Exactly.
and there's so much available in general. So those really are not lacking like they were. And some of the advantages that we had with homeschooling, I was able to go. I mean, I don't think you legally do this now, but my mom called the local vet and said, my daughter is very interested in animals, and we homeschool, and can she come and volunteer a couple days a week?
Uh-huh.
The vet 2 days a week, and I was basically like a vet assistant, or a vet assistant.
Right.
And the first day there was a dog that came in with this enormous cyst on its head, and we had to drain it and everything, and it was pretty disgusting, but I
Yeah.
learned so much. And so then
Mhm.
one day we would be in the office, and the other day we would go out to the farms, and yeah, you got to like feel the baby inside the mama cow and all this kind of stuff that you just wouldn't have that opportunity to
Right.
do otherwise. So, I learned so much, and I had so many opportunities that the kids in the public schools never had, and they
Right.
wouldn't have even have thought of those being opportunities. The world revolved around their friends, the next party or get together,
Right.
the movies, and sports. That was it. And
Right.
so, my world was so much wider than
Yeah.
that. So
So
I think
two
I,
things.
I
Yeah, go
definitely
ahead.
think there's advantages.
Yeah,
That's
I
fine.
want to say two things. You said something really important, I think. But first, I want to be sure that nobody listening gets a message that either of us are dissing public schools.
Hmm.
They exist for a reason, and
Yes.
they are very helpful. I do have friends who have put their kids back into public schools and done very well. I have friends who've had the opposite experience
Hmm.
as well. But um, I have friends who are teachers, and I know they work faithfully and they love and invest their kids, but it is a one size fits all situation. Even the best teacher who tries his or her best can't do everything. If you have 30 kids, you have to teach to the middle, and the ones at either end are either just don't get fed as you the same way when you do individually. And the other thing you said, we live in a rapidly changing information age. I mean, it's speeding up and speeding up and speeding up. I've even seen the data, but it's the bits of data available is incredible. But we are all public, private, home. We are all going to leave gaps. You cannot teach your child everything. But what you can do is what you just said. If your child knows how to learn and loves learning, the world is open to your child. So we have a gap and you missed music. And it doesn't mean you can never learn it. It slowed you down a little bit, but it didn't stop it. Or whatever your kid, if your children know how to learn, their future is wide open. Because that famous quote, education is not the filling of a bucket, but the lighting of a fire. You cannot fill that bucket. But if you've lit the fire of knowing how to learn and loving learning, that was my goal for my kids. So I think that was a very important statement that you said.
Yes, for sure. So then how do we help people who, I know there's a lot of parents right now, you know, because we have a wide range of socioeconomic situations in the United States and of course in the world. And there's people that have access to technology, that have access to the resources, and that maybe have the understanding of those resources because they've encountered them themselves. Maybe they've had a library nearby them, or they've had other people that have guided them through this. But what do we tell people that are, again, kind of being pushed into this place of making a decision? How do they start out homeschooling, or maybe even hybrid schooling, where they're doing maybe some classes a couple days a week, they're going to the public school, but then what do they do the other 3 days a week when their kids still need to learn? They're trying to work. They don't have the money to buy everybody their own computer or their own tablet. You know, what are some of the resources that, or some of the ideas that we can give to those parents?
Well, one of the things I would suggest, and I don't have a full answer to that, but I will say, talking about the old days, I have a friend, her daughter's graduated now. So, and they were very, very poor, I guess. She homeschooled her daughter pretty much for free for 12 years using encyclopedias, old encyclopedias, things from the library when it was open, and textbooks people gave her. She really hardly ever spent a cent, and her daughter's amazing. So I also know people who have a lot of money who spend thousands of dollars on their kids every year. And I don't know that it turns them out any better. You do have the opportunity for more information, so they may have had more of some kind of information than another.
Yeah.
But you don't need a computer. You don't have to. We tend to think today in the term of devices. You don't really need that. I love the resources you can find, but if you go to like young kids, if they don't really learn from just hearing it, they need to do it. So if you're doing math, then pull out the Legos and counting and sorting and baking and cooking and measuring and
building
and building.
Yes.
And you know,
and doing business.
Yes.
Have a business, have a lemonade. I mean, I don't think you can do that during Corona, but you know, do some sort of business, you know, take care of the neighbors' yards or something like that.
Exactly.
Shovel snow.
Pick up dog poop for your neighbors.
Yes.
You know, I have known somebody who does that. But from the little ones on, and remember, play is a child's work. So just because they're playing, if the TV's off and they have, you know, arts and crafts materials, I mean, cheap paper, You'd use the flip side of paper and some crayons, and not all the time, but you build something. If I When a child cares what's being built, cut once, measure twice, cut once. Well, they just have to experience that a couple of times and then they're learning how to measure. My kids, so my little kids, we have had 8 people in our family. We were always doubling and tripling recipes. So I can remember my own struggle. I could not understand why 1/4 and 1/4 went to 1/2 because 2 was smaller than 4. It just didn't make sense. My kids had done that so often, they had no problem. They knew from experience. It wasn't even a blip on their screen because 1/4 cup makes 1/2 a cup. We've done that for years. So it's not just one time or pizza. Learn fractions with pizza, or anything or a pie or something. So there are a lot of hands-on ways to learn that people have done for hundreds of years without the internet that don't cost much. And there would be probably some cheap or free resources to give parents those ideas as well that they could get. I don't have a list in my head, but if you get
that's
the idea,
hopefully what this is about, is giving ideas, giving resources, and yeah, that's what we're trying to do here, is provide some insight into that. Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking too that can be really beneficial is kind of going back to what we were talking about, where socialization, the kids do not need to be working necessarily with people that are exactly the same age. And sometimes if you've got 4 kids or more or less, and your friend also has kids, you can put them into teams and have them do projects. You can create a little competition. You can have a science competition, and these kids will help each other work. You could put a 2-year-old with a 12-year-old, and that 2-year-old is, they might be a pain sometimes, but they're going to learn. And also the 12-year-old is going to learn, because now the 12-year-old is helping that 2-year-old to, try to explain it to them. And when you explain something to somebody else, that's when you learn. I mean, that's why I feel like teachers know so much, not because they knew it before they were teaching, but we learn from teaching. And so, so much of our education comes from explaining it to other people, and they ask those questions and you say, I don't know, but let me find out. So, and I think that's a really valuable skill. And I think that's where there's we've had the co-ops, homeschool co-ops have been a thing in the homeschool world, and now they're calling them pods. So pods are generally smaller, and they're, not always smaller, but sometimes they're live, sometimes they're virtual, but it's the same idea. And the idea is that you either bring a teacher in, or you bring a parent in that knows, or you use online resources or other resources, and the kids do school in a small group. And that's becoming more and more of a thing. So I think that is something that definitely can help in some of these situations where maybe the majority of the parents need to work. And so if there's a place where the rest of the kids can either go, or where they can check in virtually if they're older, where they can check in and make sure that they're staying on track with schoolwork, I think that is a resource that parents can use as well. It's not perfect. We haven't got it all figured out, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more resources that will be invented as time goes on, just because necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Right. I've heard also micro schools mentioned, which are a little different, I think, than the pods, or I don't know if they're synonyms, but those things, your state homeschool laws or your state school laws will apply there. And some of those are not legal and some of them are. So I would suggest, if you are considering that, you really need to investigate your state's laws, because some of it, like in our state, that would not be legal unless the pod or the school opened as a private school.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of places that the legalities are different. I mean, every state, the legalities are different. And this is one of the things that online groups can be very beneficial for, because there's generally going to be like a Massachusetts homeschool community and an Oregon homeschool community and a California homeschool community. So all these places have their own online communities. And from those communities, if you don't know anything, get into those communities and ask questions, because they know they have people that have been doing it. Many times they have teachers that have been in the middle of it, and they've got their side of the understanding. So use the resources, because they're there. So definitely use those resources. I have a question here. I have a few questions. We'll see what we can get through. The question is, how much time should my fifth grader spend on each topic? This was asked by a new homeschool parent that has a fifth grader, and it's one child, is my understanding, in the home. And they're saying, okay, so I've got the preliminary, the basic subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic, science, and social studies. That kind of covers everything, right? Yes. And so how much time should a fifth grader be spending on each one of those? And I'm curious what your answer is.
Well, first, that's so variable depending on your kid. And so I also need to say, I started homeschooling very, maybe not rigid, but very structured and wanting to, dot all the T's and cross all the things. I have gotten much more relaxed over the years as I found out it's a lifestyle. So I understand that question. My opinion is going to probably be less time than you think. I would say fifth grade, an hour and a half to 2 hours seat work is plenty. And I don't mean that the learning stops, but I would mean actual book work. The rest of the day, you can jump off of that learning. And like I mentioned, and even watch a movie, write, build something.
Cook dinner.
Cook dinner, yes. Chores, some free time, free reading time. And then, okay, you read Johnny Tremaine. You read a book about U.S. history. What can you pick a scene out of that book and build it with Legos or paint it or something? What would you need for that? Or
reenact it.
Or reenact it, yes. Make a sketch, film it, do a stop motion video on it to get your child engaged in the method, in the topic. And music lessons, sports. You want to play soccer? Why don't you go practice dribbling? Or there's a world of learning that is not sitting down with a pencil and a pen. And most of that engaged learning is better.
Yes, for
Feels
sure.
the lesson.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, my mom did the same thing. So, my dad was the principal, but then when they started homeschooling, it was mom, because we had a family business and dad was a salesperson. So he was out, selling 2 weeks, and then he'd come back for a weekend and then he'd go. So it was mom's responsibility primarily. And she was, trying to make sure everything was legal and everything was within the bounds of the state laws. This was in Wisconsin. And so, making sure, okay, we've got to do this much time and marking it all down and everything. And for me, that was not helping me at all. And interestingly, I was setting aside my fifth grade workbooks in order to read college textbooks, because that's what I was interested in.
Right.
And I would find these at, garage sales or whatever. I got, get books on zoology or whatever. And I would hide those behind my, fifth grade math. And every time mom wasn't looking, I'd be looking up the textbooks from the university and whatnot. And my mom's like, how do I even handle this? Like, I know what she's doing, but I want to encourage her interest in learning and more advanced topics. But at the same time, I have rules that I needed to do. And so she just canned the whole time thing. And she said, okay, at this point, it doesn't even matter. I don't care how much time you spend. Get the work done. When the work is done, you're finished. And that's when I learned to work really fast.
Yeah.
So I would get in there and I'd be done in an hour or an hour less with, all 5-6 subjects, because I didn't need that much time. And then I could read my college level zoology books or whatever it was that I was reading at the time. But yeah, she learned the same thing. She's like, you can't. And I think this is the problem. A lot of new homeschool. I see so many new homeschool parents, and especially if you've got one kid, because if you've got 3, 4, or 5 kids, you already know you got to pick those battles, know.
Right.
But if you got one kid, you're trying to do everything perfectly, and you're trying to, okay, I got to make sure they get the right amount, and I'm going to do it right, and that my kid's going to have the best education ever. your kid is going to have the best education ever because you are their parent and you know them better than anyone. And so you're going to be tuned into what they need far more, generally speaking. I mean, this is not always the case, but it usually is the case. You're going to be tuned in a lot better than a teacher who has 20, 30 kids in their classroom,
Right.
and they're trying to, divide themselves between that many kids that need their attention. So I don't, when I saw this question, I kind of laughed because it sounded like my mom, and it sounded like all the others that I knew that had tried to approach homeschooling the right way and be all careful. And I'm going to get the right textbooks, and we're going to have a schedule, and they're going to get up, and they're going to, shower and get out of their pajamas and all that. Sometimes it doesn't happen.
This is true.
Yeah, sometimes it's just a pajama day all day.
Right.
So
I would add one thing there, Priscilla, and this is really just when you homeschool it blends parenting and home, and education really. And so less seat work is better the younger they are. Yeah. But I will say you can have a kid who needs encouragement to finish. And a small example is one of my children, third grade-ish, because we were still in a math workbook, be like 2 hours and she was still working on her lesson. And I would go, every number digit had a hair bow and clothes and a friend and butterflies. And
she's an artist.
She wasn't doing the math. But I didn't know what to do. And my mentor suggested, so this daughter's best friend lived across the street and went to public school. And that child rang a doorbell every day at 3:25. Mm-hmm. My mentor suggested this, said, okay, I'm going to give you whatever was plenty of time to do your math, half an hour or whatever. And if you don't finish it, that's fine. It will be homework. Homework time is at 3:25. And it only took once.
Yes.
For her not to be able to go out to play because she had homework to do. Mm-hmm. For her to decide, okay, I need to finish this.
I should get this done before 3:25.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I have also, I think I saw this question come in. I have been known, it probably was the same child who did not like math and would complain and complain to take away her privilege to do math. And she earned latrine duty instead. Ooh. After a week of latrine duty, instead of math, she was begging to be able to get her math done. Mm-hmm. So math was always an issue all the way through, but we got it done.
Yeah, it was for me too. And I'm not sure why. I do really well with music theory, which is, very similar. Right. As mm-hmm. It's based in the same thing. It's based in numbers and formulas, but it made sense with music and math. I just was like, I don't like it, so I'm not going to like it. That's basically what I decided. And I struggled. It was the only class that I struggled with in university when I was my undergrad. The only one that I had problems with was math, because I'm just like, I never understood it then. I don't understand it now. And I'd been out of school for 15 years by the time I went back for my undergrad. So I'm like, I really don't understand it now. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge. But there's another question that I wanted to address here too, and this is kind of talking about a little bit about the COVID and things that are going on. And there's a lot of things that are going on right now, not just COVID and whatnot. But how do we, as homeschool parents and homeschool teachers, address some of the difficult issues that are going on in the world? How do we, and I feel like this is where the challenge is. There's some heavy things that are happening in the world. And if you turn on the news, or even, on YouTube, or anywhere, if you go on social media, you're bombarded with so much negativity and so much division and so much anger and so much hurt. And how do we address those things and not gloss over them without letting them, I guess, consume the children, consume us, and living life, but also not being ignorant, not being, you know what I mean? Like, how do we balance that?
That's such an easy question. I'm going to let you handle that one.
It's such an easy question. You're going to let me handle.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I'm just teasing it. You know, that's a parenting thing. The only difference with homeschooling, really, in that situation, is you are not having another authority figure like a teacher speak into it. You're the one speaking into it. And that's a big responsibility. But raising kids is a big responsibility. Raising kids who are full of mercy and compassion and justice and truth. And I don't remember if we addressed this here. Lumalearn is a faith-based organization. It's very important. I did not become a believer in Christ until I was out of college. And what I would say is I welcome students with questions into my online classes, but we have a responsibility as parents to teach our kids that probably neither side they're hearing is completely correct.
Yeah.
That there is truth on both sides, and we need to seek that truth, learn to listen, learn to discuss things without committing ad hominem fallacies, attacking the person. What are the facts here? Did that really happen? How do we know? Big question today. How do we know this is a reputable source? So if the older kids, we teach them to check their sources. That is not an easy thing to do. To listen to those who have more expertise or more experience, to listen to those who may be being silenced by either side shouting, to know what the truth is, like I believe that is in scripture. What does God say about this? God is not a Republican or Democrat, but one of those platforms might follow his principles closer than another platform. We need to know what those principles are before we make a judgment. But they will know we are Christians by our love. We are commanded to love and serve and have mercy and seek justice. And we help our kids, when things are terrible, we admit it, we cry with them. And what can we do to make it better? So that's an incomplete answer, but it addresses the things that are important to me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that looking at that too is one of the important things. And this is what I look at. I teach a lot of classes that are based in critical thinking. And one of the things with critical thinking is to be able to embrace the possibility that I may never know the answer. There may not be one answer. For example, there's two people on the side of this discussion, or two people on the side of this argument. They have different perspectives, and both of their perspectives are valid perspectives. And and yes, they're shadowed by their own biases and their own feelings and their own what they went through themselves, but they're valid. And you can embrace somebody and mourn with them, even without agreeing with them completely. You can say, I don't understand why it is that maybe you are responding in this way, but I empathize with the fact that this is a real issue for you. But I do think that truth really has been a little bit sidestepped in many things, and so much of it is emotion, or whoever's, like you said, whoever's shouting the most, whoever's shouting the loudest, they get the attention. But I think what's happened here, interestingly, with COVID, is that parents have been forcefully handed back the job of parenting. And I hear, it's funny because, I hear this on both sides. I hear the president talking about it. I hear other people talking about it, and they're saying these kids need to get back to school because they're going through abuse at home. And my thought is, going back to school is not the solution. I mean, yes, we don't want them in harm's way, but where did we get? How did we get to the point where we are now trying to keep children away from their parents so that the children are safe? I don't understand that. And I'm not a parent, but I have a lot of children in my life. a lot of nieces, nephews, great nieces,
Mhm.
nephews, and I can't even imagine taking the responsibility away from the parent to the point that you say, we need to bring these kids into a public school setting, which is essentially a sterile situation, ideally sterile situation, where they're being protected from all of the things that might go wrong. And more importantly, where their parents have no responsibility. And I think this goes back to, and that's an extreme, but I think it goes back to what we were talking about, where you say it's a parenting question of how are we going to address these things. But unfortunately, it hasn't been given to the parents for a long time in a public school setting. Most of these social issues have been dominated by public school teachers, counselors, and textbooks and things like that. So there's been one way to look at things from a certain, whether it's a political perspective or a spiritual perspective or whatever that is. There's been one way to look at things that is given to the kids, and the parents, I don't know if they've given up their right to, or if it's just easier to let the school deal with it. And I know not all parents are doing it. I don't think it's the majority that are doing it, but it's enough so that we are now noticing that children are less safe at home than they are in a public school, which to me, in an institution, that's what it is, which to me is mind blowing. And so I feel like, even though I'm really torn, because you want to keep these kids safe, but we need to get to the point where we are handing the responsibility back to the parents and saying, okay, they are your children. We will support you. We will do everything we can to help you. We're going to try to equip you. We're going to try to give you the wisdom, instill in you the wisdom and the resources, and, counseling if you need, or whatever it is that you need, the prayer, for you to have success in leading your children. But they are your children. They do not belong to the state. They do not belong to the public school. And I think this is a very interesting, I didn't intend to really get off on this tangent, but such is life.
Right.
But I think this is a really interesting thing to talk about when we're talking about how things are in the world. These kids are given the right answer many times in the public school, and then they go back and inform their parents, no, this is the way you need to think about it. And it's becoming backwards, where the kids are informing their parents of what their parents should think about social issues, instead of vice versa, and the parents walking them through it and saying, okay, this is life, this is what we've experienced, this is the reality of what's going on here in our neighborhood, instead of just what you've read in a textbook. So it is a hard question, but I think it's one that the more we talk about, I'm a big fan of communicating and talking. I think the more we talk about an issue, the more we talk about a situation, the more we can address the potential ways to deal with it. So yeah, I don't know if that gave anybody an answer, but maybe it gets us thinking a little bit. There's one more question that I wanted to address. I think we've got a few minutes left here. So, and that is the simple question. We've talked about it a little bit, but maybe not so much from a today standpoint. And that question is simply, where do I start? So where does a parent start? They suddenly have their kids at home, and it could be a multitude of different situations. It could be, again, the situation with my nieces here. They're going to be going to school 2 days a week, and then at home the other 3 days a week. And they're teenagers, and teenagers want to sit on social media and hang out with their friends the rest of the time. So what are they going to be doing for those other 3 days when the parents are working? They're teenagers, so they can stay home alone, but are they going to be productive? And then there's the other side of, where do I start? I've got, somebody going into kindergarten or into pre-kindergarten, and how, where do I start in that situation? Or maybe the parent who says, how do I start even maybe looking at putting together a pod, or putting together some sort of, where do I start with looking at curriculum versus online schooling? There's so many things to look at from here, but can we give a little bit of guidance on what do these parents, what can they tackle first? What are the first things to look at?
I think first place you start is you pray about it if you're a believer, but then you look at your state laws What am I required to do? And then say, do I want to do that? Okay, you really have to figure out if you want to do that. When you ask that question on Facebook, like we said earlier, you're going to get so many responses, but you start with your state Facebook group or organization to get solid information. Okay, and once you've decided, okay, I want to do hybrid, or I want to keep them in the, I've seen people doing virtual school and saying, I want to add on to their learning and, have them learn more. And I'm thinking, if they're spending 4 to 6 hours a day in virtual learning, I would not add anything. But I don't know the kids. So there's so much individualization there. Do you want hybrid? If you're virtual schooling, your kids are going to be sitting enough. I personally don't think you should add anything, not a thing, unless it's something fun and play-based. And if you want to play math games or shoots and ladders or Yahtzee or something, that is game schooling is good. Game schooling applies the knowledge. So you can do minimal, I would call it supplementary work. Your kids who, I don't know, teenagers, a lot of them just want to sleep till noon and 2 o'clock. And then if they have the opportunity, I have met homeschool teenagers in my class and saying, oh no, I don't want to go public school because I like sleeping in, and just as a personal thing. So anything from a home-based industry to chores to reading to, it depends on the instrument, to music practice or sports practice or helping a neighbor, or can't go serve at a nursing home now, but something purposeful, because teenagers are young adults and they really do need a purpose.
Yes.
God made man to work, but that purpose should be something that fulfills them, that they have an interest in, or if they're not interested in anything, exploring. Okay, we're going to explore 10 different things this year and see if you're interested in it or something.
Yeah.
But you have to comply with the laws of your state. And then you have so much curriculum available to you. There's a great website by Kathy Duffy called, it's DUFFY. Her book is called The Best 102 Curriculum Suggestions or something. But she has some personal quizzes in there where you can find out what kind of learning and teaching you are drawn to. What are your gifts? And then she matches up different curricula that match those gifts. It's a good place to start. And then you look at your kids saying, oh, my kid has to move to learn. They are never going to sit down and just do workbook lessons. What can I do to teach them that complements the person they are, their learning style? And that is a good suggestion to find out what you like as a teacher and a curriculum and what appeals to your student, and mesh them somehow. So those are my best suggestions off the top of my head.
Yeah, well, and I would say, I think those are great. I think for me, I would say the first thing, or one of the first things that needs to be done, is that your child, even if your child is 4 or 5 years old, they should be part of the decision-making process from the beginning. That's my opinion, because I have seen parents come up with, oh, we're going to use this curriculum, that curriculum, and the kid, it just does not connect with the kid. If your child is able to be invested into the process of homeschooling, and they have bought into it, and they say, okay, I like this curriculum, I like this topic, I like this science project that we're going to have for this term or whatever it is, then they have made that decision, and you can remind them, this was your choice. This was not my choice. We worked this out together. But then also have those segments short, and the younger the kid is, the shorter those segments should be. So when you say, okay, my kids are going to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, have breakfast, and sit down and have their homework or their schoolwork, start their schoolwork, be okay with reevaluating that after maybe a week or two. If they're young kids, if they're older kids, maybe you want to go for a semester or something like that. But you need to be able to be flexible and reevaluate. And again, bring the kids in on that and say, okay, this is not working. What can we do that will make it work? Because kids have a lot of solutions. Kids are smart and they know what they need. And a lot of times they just need to be included in that decision. So that would be my advice. Definitely after prayer, sit down with the kids, sit down with the family and find out what's going to work, because your kid might have some really creative ideas of how to handle some of those things that based on the way they like to learn, the way they like to discover things. So yeah, good. Well, I think that we have hit on some interesting topics here, and I think this is a good start. We hope that those that are watching, there's a few people watching, and there should be some people that catch this video later, but we want to keep it at about an hour, and we will come back with you next week. We'll have some more questions. So if you guys have questions that you want to ask us, go ahead and leave those in the comments, and we will take a look at that before next Tuesday evening. And I'll be back here. We'll see if Margie can make it with me again, and we may have another one or two of our LumaLearn teachers. And we'd like to introduce you to more of the LumaLearn teachers, because there's some really phenomenal teachers here. And then, potentially bring some other people in so that we get a nice, diverse group of opinions. Right. And we can this is all opinions. There's not one way of doing it. We all have different right. thoughts and different ideas. So we're all building off of each other and figuring it out. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, Margie. It was great talking to you. Priscilla. And I will see you soon. Okay. So I'll see everybody else, all of our watchers soon as well. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.